Good morning to our UK participants and good evening to our Australian participants. I'm delighted to announce the launch of our second Rethink Reset report, The Road to Net Zero. This second report, in partnership with National Australia Bank and Investment New South Wales, is packed with industry insights, case studies, and takeaway thoughts focusing on carbon neutrality, electrification, renewable energy, and creating a cleaner, greener planet. The Road to Net Zero explores how industries in Australia and the UK are rethinking and resetting the road ahead to create sustainable and credible outcomes for the good of business and the environment. With COP26 in Glasgow scheduled for the beginning of November, now is a critical period in which industries are setting out their targets to help tackle climate change, invest in a greener planet, and reach carbon neutrality. We are thrilled to be sharing with you the insights from our members and industry leaders across the energy sectors, focusing on research and development, manufacturing, financing, people, and planning and design. Now, to help deep dive on this topic further, our webinar today will feature speakers from National Australia Bank, Robert Walters, and the University of Queensland to share their views and current work on the road to net zero. Our first speaker is Ram Vijayaseelan, Director of National Australian Bank. Welcome, Ram. Ram is a director in NAB's specialist finance team, having joined the bank in 2013, and he's responsible for leading structured project and acquisition financing in the energy and infrastructure sectors across the UK and Europe. Ram's focus is on the renewable sector, having led multiple transactions across solar PV, onshore wind, offshore wind, and waste to energy. Ram has over 13 years banking experience in the UK and Australia prior to joining the NAB, and he's worked for a project finance consultancy and an equity analyst prior to the NAB. Ram is a chartered financial analyst and holds a Bachelor of Commerce and a Bachelor of Laws from the University of Sydney. Please welcome Ram Vijayaseelan. Good morning, Ram.
Thanks, Joanne. Good morning.
Good morning. The road to net zero is definitely gaining momentum. And so could you tell us this evening, what key initiatives the National Australia Bank has put in place to define and reach their ambitions? And how are you working with clients to help them achieve their goals?
Thanks, Joanne. Look, you're absolutely right. The topic is getting the airtime it does deserve, and it really is great to see governments and companies making firm commitments around their decarbonisation goals. NAB itself understands that we do need to be part of the solution and to also support our customers to take action as well. In terms of what initiatives NAB has put in place, the bank has previously announced a range of measures, including a target of 70 billion Australian dollars of environmental finance by 2025. We're looking to source 100% of our energy from renewable sources by the same timeframe. We've committed to reducing our thermal coal mining exposure to zero by 2035. And I think probably most importantly, we are aligning our business operations as well as our lending portfolio to achieve net zero carbon emissions by 2050. Addressing the second part of your question in terms of how we're looking to work with our clients to help them reach their goals, I think the first thing to do is to acknowledge that one, NAB obviously has a very wide customer base, both in terms of various sectors and various sizes. And all our customers are at very different stages along the decarbonisation path. But we're still committed to working closely with all of them, and particularly our largest greenhouse gas emitting customers in really helping them to develop or improve their low carbon transition plans. NAB itself is building a team of highly qualified climate bankers with the appropriate training to really lead these discussions with our customers, because this can be a difficult and sometimes sensitive topic. So our bankers need to have the right knowledge and skill set to really help our customers navigate the complexity of transition.
So, Ram, that's really interesting. And when we think about banking, we think about issues like creditworthiness and risks, and also we think about opportunities. But when are you able to discuss, what creditworthiness factors NAB looks at or some of the risks that NAB will consider when looking at some of these projects?
Sure. Look, you're absolutely right. As a financial institution, understanding the risk profile of our customers is absolutely fundamental and core to what we do to ensure that our customers have the capacity to repay any financings in place and that they're unlikely to lead to financial distress. You mentioned earlier that my particular area of focus is on lending to clients investing in renewable energy projects, such as wind farms and solar parks. So touching on this particular sector, probably the two key factors that impact these customers and their cash flows are the amount of power generated at the project, which is generally a function of how windy or sunny it is, as well as the price that they receive for that electricity generated. In terms of the amount of power generated, we rely on technical advisors who prepare pretty sophisticated forecasts based on a number of assumptions around historical wind speeds or solar levels in that area, based on the specific location of the project, the equipment being used. Now, it isn't an exact science, given weather is unpredictable, so we can expect variability from period to period. What we're seeing now, actually, in the UK, over the last 6 months or so, wind speeds have been well below long-term averages, and this has been impacting our customers which do own and operate wind farms. In terms of that second factor of the price received for the power that they sell, again, this varies from project to project, depending on whether they benefit from a government subsidy or have a fixed price power purchase agreement in place, or whether they operate on a fully merchant basis. For those projects which do have power price exposure, again, we rely on very sophisticated market advisors to provide their forecast based on a number of assumptions, typically around commodity prices and the energy capacity mix. At the moment, it is quite heavily publicised that UK power prices are at record levels as a result of soaring gas prices. So our generator clients with unhedged power price exposure really are benefiting from this at the moment.
And does the bank support your clients to be able to hedge those prices? I mean, what can you say about, some of the mechanisms one could use or organisations can use to hedge power prices?
Sure. NAB at the moment doesn't offer a product to hedge power prices per se. So most of our clients looking to hedge their power prices will either enter into a power purchase agreement with a utility or with a corporate themselves who are looking to lock in their cost of electricity. So that is a trend that we are seeing, more and more corporates trying to lock in a renewable energy resource to promote their own sustainability goals. And for them, it's also a way for them to manage their power price exposure.
And just as a general topic, Ram, what opportunities are there for businesses to invest in these kinds of ECG projects?
Look, the number of opportunities out there is growing every day for governments to meet their net zero ambitions. Investment in the sector is really going to need to step up considerably. what we're seeing is that the companies are seeing that investing in these ESG focused projects or even addressing ESG issues within their own sector doesn't necessarily hurt their financial performance and can actually deliver financial rewards. One way that financial institutions look to support businesses in this transition is actually through offering financings which incentivize better ESG performance through linking margins on their loan to predetermined ESG performance targets. So these KPIs can be things like reducing their greenhouse gas emissions, delivering greater diversity in the workforce, or using less water in industrial processes. So I think there are many opportunities out there for customers who really want to make a difference and to address their current ESG issues.
I think that's very interesting that the margins are linked to that kind of performance, because that's a new concept in banking, and that's certainly by many sectors will be welcomed. Yeah,
definitely. I think a lot of our customers, when they are refinancing their loan or looking to place a new loan, it's definitely something that they do want to incorporate going forward. NAB itself has actually recently launched an ESG linked derivatives product that naturally flows on from these facilities. So our customers can actually hedge their interest rate risk, inflation, or even FX risks that are tied to these transactions, while at the same time fostering their sustainability goals or managing their own in-house ESG related risks.
Now NAB has traditionally done significant work in wind and solar. What other emerging markets are you seeing in terms of ESG?
Sure. Yeah, I think the first point to note is that continued investment in these well-established technologies like wind and solar are still going to be essential over the next 30 years to meet net zero goals. And if anything, there's going to be a need to really step up investment in wind and solar. One of the drawbacks, however, of having so much of your electricity grid comprised of wind and solar is that they are intermittent generators. So it's obviously not sunny at night, and as we can see over here in the UK at the moment, not during the day at this time of year as well. And wind generators can be as equally unpredictable. On the other hand, demand for electricity is fairly predictable and stable. And as we phase out fossil fuel generators, fueled by coal and gas, we need to find a way to meet demand for electricity when the renewable resource isn't there. One particular sector that we're seeing a number of opportunities on at the moment is the rise of utility scale battery projects. So this is a technology that isn't new. It's been around for a number of years now. The challenge for these projects, though, is to build batteries that are big enough to store large amounts of energy over a greater length of time. The cost of building batteries has declined significantly over the last few years, and it's a trend that we really do expect to continue. And this is going to really drive investment in the sector. I think the other sector that's worth calling out and that has got a lot of press recently is green hydrogen. So using hydrogen both as a fuel source and as a way of storing energy. This is a sector that is at a much earlier stage than batteries. Governments around the world are publishing their hydrogen strategies, including one from the New South Wales government last week. And there are a number of small-scale pilot and research projects out there. And the goal now is for companies and governments to really find a way to scale up the industry. And us as a financial institution, I think our goal is to really understand these new asset classes and their business models, which are evolving very quickly, for us to be able to offer appropriate financing solutions at the right time.
Well, and that's absolutely excellent. And I'm sure our audience were very pleased to hear about the initiatives that NAB are taking, and in particular, your ideas and insights into financing of this sector. Thank you very much for coming along and sharing with us today. And I'm sure you'll be available to speak to any of our audience should they want to find out more about the financing and hedging techniques that NAB are prepared to offer. Thank you.
Definitely. Thanks, Joanne.
Thank you. We're now going to turn our attentions to research and development and higher education. And I'm very pleased to welcome Dr. Cleanne Gabriel, who's the Senior Lecturer in Strategy at the School of Business in the University of Queensland. Cleanne is a specialist in sustainable development and higher education. She's a researcher and educator within the strategy and entrepreneurship discipline of the UQ Business School, and the school's director for United Nations Principles for Responsible Management Education. Cleanne is a senior fellow of the Higher Education Academy and an award-winning educator and a director of the Northern American Case Research Association. She's also a member of Impact 2030 Council of Australia. Cleanne researches in the areas of post-growth futures, renewable energy enterprise, and business models for sustainability. Welcome, Cleanne.
Thank you, Jo. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Good. Tam, what would be really interesting to hear about are the key initiatives that University of Queensland has launched and to define and reach their ambitions in this area.
Yeah, look, I'm happy to shed some light on what we are doing here at the University of Queensland currently. So at the moment, we all know we're working towards working along with this increased attention and momentum towards net zero, which is a global goal and a global target. And the challenge we have at the moment is scaling this very global grand target to the level of individual organizations like the University of Queensland and our stakeholders and suppliers and customers, etc., along our value chain. And we've already made quite really good steps along that journey. As a matter of fact, we are in the very final stages at the moment of developing our sustainability strategy over time. So we're just waiting for that to be approved. And within that sustainability strategy, our stakeholders can see some pretty concrete steps that we intend to take to become or to enhance our sustainability, reduce our carbon footprint as an organization, and also to contribute to efforts to offset our activities over time. So the big project at the moment is a solar project. And we have quite a long history over time with the implementation of solar power plants. So we have a couple at Heron Island and at Gatton, but we have also the Warwick Solar Farm, which became operational in the middle of last year and made the University of Queensland actually globally the first major university to be able to offset 100% of its electricity generation by renewable energy. And we're actually quite proud about that because that's a really big step to get us along that path, at least to neutrality. So that we know that despite the fact that we are operating within an electricity system that's largely powered by coal and fossil fuels, we actually can make up for that with renewable generation that we as an institution now own and can operate as well. And so the Warwick Solar Farm is quite an important initiative for us. It's also going to be the site for a lot of our research and teaching, as well as we continue to understand better the kinds of investment and commitments that are required by large organizations such as the University of Queensland in order to make these kinds of commitments to renewable energy. And so the investment in that solar farm actually helps us then to pay less, of course, on our electricity bills, and the money that we actually get from selling our energy back to the grid then helps to pay off the financing, and Ram was speaking of the financing, and also help to further research and teaching in the area as well. We have quite a few other initiatives in terms of energy. There are quite a few people across the university working on mobility, in particular e-mobility and battery technology, and looking at, as Ram described, different types of technology to enhance our ability to store more energy over time, and increasingly more renewable energy as well. So those are the sort of major projects that we are doing that affects our stakeholders and those along our value chain. Internally, of course, as an institution, we are constantly trying to not just enhance our offsets, but reduce our actual emissions themselves. And that includes things like looking at our waste, looking at water, biodiversity, contributing also to reduction in deforestation and that kind of thing, and also looking at all of the technology involved in managing our sites and our buildings and making sure that they're running at the highest efficiency possible. So we are operating both at this organizational internal level and looking at our own neutrality, but we acknowledge as well that there's still work to be done as we journey towards net zero, particularly in the current environment in Australia, where we are waiting for targets to be set at a national level that we can then address and align with.
Well, look, that's always very helpful when you're leading by example. I think whoever's taking note of your research, and certainly students, will be looking very much to the fact that you are a leader in this area. Now, Pan, in the report, you talk about the Carbon Literacy Project, helping individuals and organisations tackle climate change. And so on that particular project, the Carbon Literacy Project, can you tell us a bit more about that and how it's achieving goals there?
Yeah, I'm really happy to talk about carbon literacy, Joe. So the carbon literacy is a partnership that we initiated with the Carbon Literacy Project in the UK. So it's a UK not-for-profit organization who have developed a standard for literacy. And what carbon literacy does, it's a training program that exposes anyone who's interested or who wants to understand why there's all this talk and action towards net zero can attend this training. It's a few hours, and we sort of teach them the basics of climate. So the climate change, climate science, and what are the key actions we need at a systemic level and at an individual level. The good thing about carbon literacy, so this is not just sort of a crash course in climate science. What we can do is we tailor the course itself to suit specific sectors. So what we are in the process of doing now is working with particular companies to understand their own particular impacts on climate, so how climate affects them and they then affecting climate change, and we tailor the training to suit them. So at the moment, we have completed a pilot and we've launched the program, and actually next week and leading into COP26 on November 1st, where we have another rollout of the course that's being offered. And we also have an industry pilot in November that we have commitment from Boeing and PwC, and they'll be the first to go through that training as corporate entities with us. And so carbon literacy is functioning as an entry point to not just the conversation and the answer of the question why we need to work towards net zero, but what's happening is once people complete our carbon literacy training, they get a certificate. That's an internationally recognized certificate. But if you are an organization, we can also work with you to work towards what we call carbon literate organization status. And we then are looking to the next step for us is to provide advice and some support as organizations increasingly look to walk the talk towards reducing their carbon emissions. So look, we're so excited about it because it's actually quite a simple little training, a product or service that we offer, but it's just the entry point to these conversations and helping a lot of these organizations to take action on climate change.
So I guess one of the questions the audiences might have is, is this project available to small, medium enterprises and startups? Because often it's the bigger companies that can avail of these kinds of projects and activities. But what about the little organisations, the smaller ones and the startups?
Yes, absolutely. Look, the bigger organizations are the ones, obviously, that can afford to pay for it, to speak frankly. But we are operating as a not-for-profit model, and we do have options available for community organizations actually who want to become carbon literate, and we do have options where they can engage with us for free. So there's no fee if you're a community-based organization, if you're a small business and you have really small revenues. Then we are happy to engage. So this is not something that we're only offering to corporates. It's not it's meant to be accessible even to small businesses, to community-based organizations, to actually the general public. We have members of just general public Brisbane citizens who've signed up to take the course because they want to have impact simply in their neighborhood. And we're working with the larger corporates. They actually will make a financial contribution, and that financial contribution then allows us to provide the same knowledge and training for free to small businesses, not-for-profits, community-based organizations, and our students as well. We can't forget them.
Cleanne, all very interesting and excellent, and I'm so pleased to see that we can incorporate this to all sectors of the business community. Now tell me, what is next for the business school? What's the next thing that you'll be working on? Because these initiatives are fabulous, they've got momentum. Where to now?
So just building on this, sort of the success of carbon literacy so far, what we have developed and are looking to launch early next year is an executive education program on climate risk. And it touches on some of the things that Ram mentioned before, not just the physical risk, but those transition risks. So things like litigation risk, et cetera, that can happen as companies increasingly need to wean themselves off of fossil fuels. And that's going to be open to anyone, but we highly recommend executives or senior leadership of companies to join, to take that course, or at least send us an email and we can send all the information. And so climate risk would help with that understanding of the different risks that come with this transition to net zero that we're all working towards. We're also working on, Joe, the next step is we're building out this offering where we can take all these organizations by the hand, whether big, small, and we have some commitments from organizations willing to be our pilots and trials at this stage, starting from next year, to take them towards the steps towards net zero. Because the question we keep getting is, how do I know my baseline? How do I calculate where I am now? How do I actually set a target that's science-based, meaning that it actually aligns with the 1.5-degree Paris target? And then how do I actually do it after I set a target and a vision? What is the steps I need to take that will affect my assets, my people, and also reputation to get me to achieve that target over time? So we are working with a couple of companies now to see whether the pathways we've outlined can work in practice as a stepwise approach to achieving net zero.
And that's absolutely excellent. We're really pleased to hear about what you're doing at the university. And I'm so pleased that you've reached out to our audience and asked them to engage with you. And I'm sure you'll get a lot of take up on that. So thank you very much. And we'll be back to you with questions later on in the session. For the next part of our webinar, I'm very pleased to introduce Jane Lowney, who's the Associate Director, Engineering and Infrastructure at Robert Walters. Jane is a degree qualified civil structural engineer with industry and recruitment experience within the engineering sector. And having studied engineering at the university, Jane offers a unique technical understanding of clients' requirements, given her educational background. Prior to entering the recruitment market in 2010, Jane worked in business outsourcing organisations in Ireland and Poland, as well as working with an engineering consultancy. Jane is particularly passionate about diversity and inclusion in the engineering sectors and is an active participant in industry working groups and events to improve diversity and to encourage participation in STEM. Jane is a board member of the Infrastructure Association of Queensland and a regular content contributor to Sourceable and other industry publications. Jane, welcome.
Thank you.
Jane, first question for you is, how is Robert Walters working with the state government to help their clients reach their ambitions in net zero targets?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I suppose when I thought about this, as a recruitment firm, first and foremost, our role is really to connect people, and with any emerging market, emerging technology, Robert Walters has been, I suppose, in the fortunate position that we have that global footprint. It might be a new trend or a new skill set required in Australia, but it's likely somewhere in the globe we have touched on or done something in the same capacity. So we've been able to really, I suppose, give a bit of a global view to our local stakeholders at a state and local government level. And then at a more kind of, recruitment level, we've been involved in everything from environmental policy recruitment, resource recovery, waste management strategy. So more broadly, I suppose, in a circular economy kind of concept, which I think really is where we're leading to from a net zero perspective. Yes, it's a fossil fuels conversation, but ultimately, I think about it as a tread lightly kind of mentality overall, and certainly we're seeing state governments working really hard to get the right policies in place to try and drive, I suppose, and influence industry into considering the sustainability of their goods, their materials, their supply chain, their products, etc., as well as trying to, I suppose, fund other industries to grow effectively in Queensland. Particularly, I suppose I'm most familiar here, and it's a very large geographical footprint. There's a concentration of population in the southeast corner. We've got a lot of regional and rural communities in other areas. So the government is very focused on the economic development plans to ensure that the whole state gets to benefit from the opportunities, but also can mitigate some of the challenges and risks through that transition period that we are facing into from a renewables or from an energy sector perspective.
Well, that's absolutely valuable for you to be able to offer that support to those organisations. And Jane, tell me, during the pandemic, how difficult was it to recruit talent? I mean,
it was wild. It's still a little bit wild, but it certainly has calmed down significantly now. So at the start of the pandemic, it's the unknowns. And once you start getting any kind of unknowns creeping into any market, be it economic, political, in this instance, health related, people don't want to move jobs. They don't want to take a risk. They don't want to leave where they are currently. There was still recruitment requirements and activity. There wasn't really any slowdown. It was more a candidate-led hesitation. And then I suppose if you fast forward from, maybe early 2020 to now, you've got this pent up need of people from an organizational perspective, maybe not making hiring commitments last year with that uncertainty. So now there's this pent up need. And also, I think it's just totally radicalized how we look at our workforce. So, working from home, and particularly in my world, in engineering and infrastructure, be it energy or traditional, transport assets, you didn't work from home. There was no alternative way of working. You turned up to the office every day. And I think it's transformed what the workforce looks like, radically. And I don't think we would have achieved that transformation with anything else other than a major shift like this. It hasn't been smooth sailing. It continues to be a challenge, in the context of Australia, to move people from state to state, not to mind to say, external to the market here or getting that global talent. We do rely heavily on global migration, particularly in emerging markets, emerging technologies. So that has been very difficult, but also I think the factor that we haven't really seen publicized as much, which will become apparent very quickly, is that there's also been a big exodus from Australia, with the borders being closed now for almost 2 years. And you'll tell by my accent, I'm not from here originally, but people have spent 2, 3, 4 years unable to give clarity to family overseas when they can travel, etc. So a lot of people, because there is a global drive towards net zero, there is a global infrastructure-led kind of recovery strategy, there's opportunities in their home countries. So actually, I think, that the longer term impact of COVID is will we see the same numbers return to Australia to replace those who've chosen to leave in the last 2 years? And how are we actually going to keep pace in the global market from a talent perspective? So I think it's raising a lot of interesting questions for the medium term as well.
I guess, the impending signature of the free trade agreement might assist there, with the movement of people and the initiatives that will be undertaken. I guess you'll be thinking, well, will more people move from the UK to Australia now that it's going to be a lot easier to be able to move under the new free trade agreement.
Absolutely, and that's definitely something we're keeping a very close eye on. And we're very fortunate, I suppose, to have both the migration capability internally to support candidates who are making that move, and having local people in the UK market who basically their only role is to attract talent into the Australian, New Zealand markets and other global markets we work in. So that is a very core part of what we invest in from that global mobility perspective. But I guess there are other countries who are vying for the same talent and for the same skill set. So it's going to be really interesting in the different attraction strategies, both at a kind of a policy and level, but right down to an individual organizational level.
Exactly. I know certainly in the UK there's a dearth of talent here, and everybody's finding it very difficult to recruit people. So on that topic of recruitment, I mean, ECG is a bit of a buzzword, ECG, we need these sorts of skill sets, we need these sorts of people. I mean, what does it really mean in the recruitment sector for you? It must cover a lot of roles, and what are you sort of seeing emerging in the recruitment sector for these ECG type roles?
So where I see it most actually at the moment is in risk governance and procurement. And I think to reflect on, Cleanne mentioned obviously looking at the value chain from a UQ perspective, but people are really looking at not just their own internal organization, but their suppliers, their vendors, and anybody else who touches their organization. So procurement is really at the forefront of that. So we're seeing quite a heavy emphasis on ESG capability in that space. We're seeing it obviously from a risk governance and financial reporting, as per requirements for listed organizations. And then I suppose as you move into maybe the SMEs, the sustainability piece is really critical, and that's from a business resilience perspective. Australia, obviously being an island nation, has been left relatively exposed through the disruption of COVID and a lot of over-reliance potentially on international supply chains in particular. So from just a purely, commercial viability perspective, people are really starting to dig into that sustainability piece, I think, and we're seeing that right across the sector. So what it's driving, I suppose, is more blended skill sets as well. Nobody went to university and became an ESG specialist, so it's actually starting to value skills and learnings that people have picked up through actual experience rather than it being kind of a defined degree or qualification. But certainly it is getting a lot of attention.
And so is there any particular push, any particular skill set? I mean, you mentioned some of the skill sets there in procurement, etc. What's going to be the next big thing beyond once these roles have been fulfilled? Can you, if you had a crystal ball looking into the future, what would you say? People?
Well, a very smart person told me a long time ago that the recruiters don't lead the market, we follow it. So we tend to try and see the trend as it's emerging and follow it desperately. But yeah, look, I think what they've been mentioned, a lot of it is, in the energy space specifically, we're probably looking at hydrogen is getting a huge amount of airtime over here right now. Huge investment in Queensland, New South Wales. Battery storage is obviously another big one, but we're seeing really interesting circular economy initiatives taking off. I'm speaking to a small startup that's a textile company that's reusing textiles for alternate purposes. So I think what it will be more around is actually looking at the concept of single-use plastic. It's going to be there's no more single-use anything, and that will apply to whether it's a piece of physical infrastructure. So for example, a road won't just be a road anymore. It will have multiple uses. It will be self-sustaining. It'll likely be energy producing. So it'll be people who can, I suppose, get the vision, start to put the pieces together from what we're trying to achieve, on a global or grand scale, and being able to actually come up with some of the engineered outcomes to make that a reality. And we're starting to see that in Brisbane. The city council here has just launched a Green Bridges initiative, for example. And that bridge is completely powered through renewable energy. They also have built in this suspended restaurant from it. So it's got multiple uses, it's got commercial outcomes, and that we're not just building a bridge to get people from A to B, but that we're actually thinking a lot more holistically around our assets and how we, I suppose, again, tread on the earth and what that footprint looks like. So I think it's really exciting.
Yeah, very exciting. Jan, thank you so much for your contribution. Going to open up to questions to the floor. So if we could have our speakers back please. And we welcome our audience to, we invite questions. I do have a couple here, so I will start with some of the questions. And this one is for NAB, for Ram. What is the bank doing for businesses to help prepare their business plans to include green KPIs and advice for businesses overall?
Sure. I think the role that NAB plays in supporting businesses is made up of two critical elements. One is the relationships that we have with our customers, and the second is the products that we can offer them. In terms of the products, I've already mentioned our ESG linked loan and derivative products that do help to incentivize better ESG performance outcomes by offering improved pricing on loans and derivatives. In terms of relationships, I think the bank's most important asset is its people, and we really want to be a centre of excellence to assist our clients with their transition plan. Jane just mentioned the importance of upskilling workforces on ESG issues, and this year a number of our bankers are going to be completing a climate banker training course developed specifically for NAB by the Melbourne Business School. Another thing that we're also doing is creating a set of reports and insights on ESG topics that we think are going to be most relevant to our customers. And these are going to be called the Bank for Transition Capability Series. Each report's going to be developed in collaboration with ESG leaders from relevant industries, fields, or universities. And these reports really should provide our customers with the best insights and best practice for their transition plans.
Excellent. Thank you, Ram. Cleanne, this is a question for you. Are you finding more courses are being offered by the university to fill gaps in skill sets mentioned by Jane?
I can't speak to increasing number of courses over time, but I can sort of speak to what's currently available. And I know that we do have quite a few courses across the university that are focused on different aspects of sustainability, in particular the environmental science. At the business school, we have a Master of Business program with a specialization in sustainability, corporate sustainability in particular. And I think if I'm thinking of this from the perspective of an employer, I think employers are going to need to think a little bit outside of the box in terms of what they're looking for in candidates to fill roles towards net zero. Because what a graduate with an MBAs in corporate sustainability will leave with is actually quite a good understanding of the climate science, of the role of organizations, organizational value chains, etc. They may not actually have specifics on exactly net zero, but they will have the skills then that are needed in order to help you define what your target should be, what your baseline will be, and also consider potentially once those people are in the organizations, there are micro-credentials that can be used as well to upskill people. So things like even coming back to our own carbon literacy course, but and climate risk. There are other little courses that take a few hours perhaps of time that can give the specifics that are needed to really understand what we mean by net zero and what are the different activities that need to be reduced or scaled up in order to reach those targets. And combined, so a micro-credential or any other kind of training, perhaps even NAB's training that Ram just mentioned, combined with, say, our MBAs and with a sustainability major, or one of our environmental science graduates, for example, with the Bachelors of Environmental Science, would certainly give an employer the skills they need to target. So I do think there's a need to think outside the box, because I'm not sure you're going to get a graduate with a degree that says net zero on it.
Yeah, well, that's very interesting because, again, because it's so emerging and, well, the whole market's emerging and innovation is such a key part of this. I mean, it seems to me that critical thinking skills are really important. And maybe, Jane, you could comment on, there's so much you can do in an interview to to assess people and assess their experience. But now when we come to how are people going to deal with innovation and responding to that, and what are the key critical thinking skills they need, you know, how do you recruit for that? How do you determine whether people do have these skill sets, which are undefined, I suppose, in a way? They're not linked to a particular course, but they're linked to how people assess a problem and deal with it, or an opportunity and deal with it.
Well, is that for me?
Well, that's for Jane. I was saying when she's recruiting. Sorry.
Okay, sorry. Yeah.
It's a great question, and I don't think we've necessarily found the right way of actually recruiting people. I think you know whether it's 1 round of interviews, 2 rounds of interviews, it's a finite period of time. Yes, you can set kind of parameters, you know, but a lot of people go down the route of conversational, gut feel type. I think they've done it for a competitor, so therefore they can do it for us, and that's okay if you're kind of doing the same thing over again. As we enter into kind of a bit more of an unknown, uncharted territory, you have to come back to the basic first principles that are, you know, that you are thought through your course or whatever else it might be. And then I think we need to resist the need to have somebody who's done it for 10 years with a competitor before, because that's not real. And I reflect on another emerging market 10 years ago when I moved to Australia, which was called coal seam gas. And that was never had been done before. But every time you spoke to an oil and gas company and they briefed you on the roles they wanted, I need 10 years experience in, you know, onshore coal seam gas. And I'm like, but all your marketing material says you're the first in the world to do it. So where am I going to get that person? There was no link because they're so used to doing the demonstrated experience as the way you brief out a role. And I think it makes people really uncomfortable in trying to talk about things like critical thinking, because how do I quantify that? And generally, a lot of times with pressures on recruitment, they are recruiting to replace somebody as opposed to being opportunistic and recognizing the capability of someone. So it's Jane left, so now I need Jane 2.0, and I know what Jane could do, and I just need to replicate that because that's the spot I need to fill. So hiring on potential and capability versus demonstrated experience is where we need to go. That's an excellent theory. How you do it in practice, look, I have ideas. Some companies do it really well, scenario based, you know, or tasks, or giving people a little bit of homework or something else to present in a different way, often will draw out a lot more evidence around the person that you're potentially considering. And then the other thing that we don't do particularly well in Australia is really value that international or overseas experience. We say we do, and we do global drives to attract people here. And then they come here, and a lot of times they find that they're told, yeah, that might have worked where you're from, but that's not how it works in Australia. And that can be really difficult to be that voice in the room. And again, I reflect on some of the more traditional industries. Shale gas was an emerging technology at one point. We brought a lot of people out from the US and Canada where they had experience in this drilling technique. And they would say that they were sidelined a lot of times going, it's different here. And to a certain degree, there are local market nuances, but you know, a battery storage project is trying to achieve very similar things in most countries, and we should really leverage off that global capability for a global target, as opposed to trying to reinvent the wheel every time. So that's what I would love to see happen. I hope that answers your question.
And no, it does. Go on.
Yeah.
I just wanted to add as well, 100% agree with everything Jane is saying, but you know, because the question was, you know, it's so hard to measure what someone's ability to do innovation and such, but we teach innovation. And it sounds sort of, you know, how can you teach innovation? But we do it by giving students the opportunity to practice in real companies. So we do have actually a program specifically on innovation and entrepreneurship. And we go through, of course, what we know to this date about the way innovation works out there in industry, timelines, commercialization, etc. What would be great actually if the members of this chamber were keen to get students in on sort of a work integrated learning pathway, to actually practice what they learn in our innovation programs and our sustainability programs, etc., in their company. Perhaps it's a project-based sort of engagement within the organization. That would be another way to help them, to help companies, employers build up the capabilities that they're looking for, the skills, and also give our students the opportunity to do it and to get practice in those organizations as well. And we actually are we actually need more of that. So by all means, do get in touch with us if you're open to that kind of engagement as well to solve some of these ESG problems in the organization.
Well, that's a great challenge to our audience to take you up on that, Leanne. What about Ram? What are your thoughts on it? I mean, the thing about traditional banking is it can be very siloed. I'm not saying that about National Australia Bank, but we're a bank, from your experience of working with the bank for some time now, what's your experience of how the bank internally is dealing with innovation and the changing markets and its talent pool?
Sure. Look, I mean, I think that I'm lucky that I work in an organisation where a lot of people are really passionate about sustainability, and the bank itself is quite ambitious in its targets. And for us to really support these targets, we do have to innovate. We do have to look at new products to support our customers through their transition journey. So you're absolutely right, though. Banks aren't the most nimble organisations. There are a lot of processes, and rightly so, to follow. But I think there really is a drive from banks to innovate in order to support our customers.
Great. And also, just from that banking viewpoint again, when companies are looking for startup investment in all sorts of areas, and maybe this is open to all of you, I mean, what should they be incorporating in when they put together their information memorandum, or, about, their focus on ESG, if it's not sort of their core business? What should they be saying about it from a point of view of what they're doing with their people, or from what point of view of what they're doing with research, or from the point of view of financing?
Sure. Look, I mean, I think it's great to address ESG issues right from the get-go, rather than being silent on it. I mean, we definitely know that investors, banks, customers, employees, Jane mentioned suppliers, they're all increasingly focused on ESG issues. So I don't think there's any downside to addressing ESG issues for an early stage startup. However, there might be downsides to neglecting ESG issues, given you might be limiting your potential investor pool, you might be limiting the employees that want to come and work for you. So I think it's great as a startup that they are looking at these issues from the start, because I think one thing for sure is that addressing these issues can actually lead to financial rewards.
Any other comments, Claire or Jane?
I would just like to, echo, I suppose, the call out to get, companies involved, but also at a localized or individual level, try and make sure that we're steering as many people as we can into STEM pathways. That's my greatest terror right now, is our take up of science, technology, engineering, mathematics-led courses is really poor. And while there is all this attention and noise and acknowledgement around where I suppose the world is moving, I'm concerned that potentially not enough students are maybe following the pathway. And I think that's going to be one of the critical concerns of the next decade from a talent availability perspective.
And Claire, are we getting what's happening with the gender balance on some of these courses? Are we getting the right gender balance?
That's a good question. I don't have the numbers just off the top of my head, but I believe we are getting actually more and more women studying in our courses than men, in terms of if we take that binary approach to gender as is reported in our statistics. So I can't really speak to the specific numbers around gender balance, but I know that, and this is sort of anecdotal, whenever we start to interact on the basis of sustainability, ESG, net zero, and there's a call out for expertise and conversations, mostly it's the women who respond at UQ. So, and that's actually something that we were discussing recently. Now we're planning for an event in November, and our marketing team said to us, but we need to get a better gender balance. There are only women on this panel, you know. So actually we're seeing that sort of shift. And I won't bore you with the research that there's actually quite a bit of research suggesting that women seem to be leading the charge towards sustainability. But I won't bore you with those details. But I'm certainly seeing more anecdotally that we are the ones more at the forefront of conversation and leading this charge in organizations.
And just on the role of universities, Cleanne, I mean, what role can universities play, and what have you seen in driving policy change between the state and federal governments?
Well, we can certainly set the example, right? As UQ is trying to do, because what we're doing is we're demonstrating that this can work at a large scale. A university, a large organization can actually invest in an asset, a renewable energy asset, and we can contribute towards this pathway towards net zero. And it's actually not just better for the environment and climate change, it makes financial sense. So we can set the example. And universities, and here in Australia, we speak of the G8, so these 8 large traditional universities, absolutely have the power and the influence to lead by example, and certainly at the state level. As for federal level, I'm not really sure about whether or not we could potentially, well, I'm being probably very pessimistic actually, because I think more and more we're seeing that, at least at the state level, that we have quite ambitious climate policies. There's no shortage of, I think, sort of grassroots demand for it. More and more organizations are recognizing this need for this shift and a more effective transition. All that's left is for our federal government to follow the lead of our businesses, our people, our communities at this stage.
Well, that's an excellent message. And just changing topics a bit, Jane, how are we going to get all these people back to Australia? What's the plan?
I know. It's a great question. I noticed the question. I hope I didn't make it sound like Australians are fleeing Australia. It's actually more international migrants are returning to home countries or home base. Yes, we can't actually leave the country right now, so that's a whole other conversation. But yes, I think, look, there is going to have to be a bit of a campaign. I think we didn't do ourselves any favor in how we dealt with temporary migrants during the pandemic. They got lost in a lot of the government support, the ability to return, and a whole range of things. So obviously, being an international migrant myself, I'm on a lot of the groups and the conversations around, how difficult 2020 was for people living internationally. So I think we do have a little bit of reputational repair to do. I think also the headlines around some of the net zero or ambition or lack thereof at a federal level also impacts our ability to be able to attract and say, hey, we want to be a global leader in hydrogen or battery storage. And you're going, okay, but every time I kind of Google Australia plus energy, I'm getting a bit of a different perception. But I think if you dig down, we are actually doing quite well at a state level. I would echo exactly what Cleanne was saying. Everyone else seems to be on board. I think there will be a grand announcement over the weekend. I think we'll get on board for next week. And I think that will go a long way. But I think, there's a way to go to really sell that and bring that capability back. And as we know, it is hard to build up that knowledge and that capability. It will take time. And I think we have to be a bit cleverer about how we go about that. So I think it's going to be interesting. I think there'll be many trips to the UK. I think I envisage a lot of recruitment roadshows happening. So yes, hopefully I will get to see you guys on that side, not too far away.
Come and visit us. Come and visit us. I really want to thank you all for such a fabulous session this evening. Jane, Cleanne and Ram, thank you so much for your contributions. It was very interesting, entertaining and thoughtful. And so I thank you for those words. I want to thank National Australia Bank for sponsoring this series, Rethink Reset. I want to thank Investment New South Wales for also sponsoring and working with us on this fabulous series, Rethink Reset. I urge all of you to read the report because we have some of the contributors here today. And I thank our audience for coming along today and participating. Just to remind you, the Australian UK Chamber of Commerce is here to help, to support, to connect businesses. And we look forward to you coming along to our next webinar. So thank you so much, and please do get in touch.